Where are the jobs? Why didn't Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's budget create more jobs? Why is this budget focused only on the rich and the corporates? This is not a budget for people who lost their jobs in the last 2 years, which is during the pandemic and the slowdown. These are some of the questions and criticisms which we have been seeing making headlines over the last couple of days since the budget was presented on Tuesday, the 1st of February, and also being talked about in columns on TV channels everywhere. But what is the reality? I mean, did the budget try to create jobs or did not try to create jobs? What exactly has the government tried to do? What exactly has Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman tried to do with the budget? Welcome to Elanomics. I'm YP Rajesh, Managing Editor at ThePrint, and I have Professor Ela Patnaik on the other side of the screen. We are doing this over Zoom because we are still working from home and the pandemic has forced us to not be in the same studio. Hi, Ela. This whole debate about creating jobs and why the budget may not have created jobs, can we go back and just take a look at why jobs and job losses and unemployment has become such a big crisis, especially because of the pandemic, although jobs were, you will tell us, were an issue even before the pandemic.
Yeah, so I think what happened during the pandemic was that a lot of construction jobs, particularly, and urban jobs were lost. And a lot of people, while they went back to their villages and while agriculture, kind of absorbs people. But when you look at the jobs data, you do realize that small enterprises, sectors like construction, of course, all the contact intensive sectors, there were huge job losses in many of those. It was also that the informal sector, which, means that I can just, the employer can just tell the daily wage worker not to turn up the next morning. So when there's a shutdown or when there's COVID, when, let's say on a construction site, he can just tell his guys not to turn up and they don't get wages. So a lot of that happened, and is continuing to happen, with Omicron, and that's led to a lot of job losses. So it's partly the disease, partly the attempt to not let the disease spread, especially when there were no vaccines. So, all over the world, you're seeing job losses. And India, you're seeing these losses.
In your column published today on the print.in, Ela, you have specifically focused on the construction sector. Uh, we talked about the budget being so heavily focused on capex and that the government is trying to focus on capex and create jobs, uh, push growth, revive the economy. Uh, why are you so specifically focused on the construction sector as the probably the route to create more jobs?
See, YP, my understanding is that no government can ignore the big problems of the day. So, in a democracy, a government has to go back to the voters and it has to address the problems that they face. Now, what of course happens is that different parties, different governments have different strategies. So, one strategy that was being discussed and that, the many economists and the opposition are claiming was the best strategy was to increase jobs like Manrega jobs, which are basically doles, where you give people some support during periods of crisis. Some to some extent assets get built, but they're not really seriously big infrastructure assets. The other way to push jobs, which you would read about not just among the very Western economists community, but also among almost the same Indian economist community as well, that has talked about public investment, that you push public investment and that pulls in private investment, but that public investment has to take the lead. Now, very often the latter has been thought of as something that is medium term and long term, because it will attract, or rather the term that economists use is crowd in, which means that you'll spend, the government will spend, and thanks to that, the private sector will also invest. Third issue here is, okay, public invests, but the government invests, but what does it invest in? Now, here I think is what is being attempted. What seems to be tried in this budget is that we focus on capex. Capex gives you the crowding in, and so in the long term it gives you an increase in investment. Now investment has been going down since 2011-12, so, and private investment was just not reviving for various reasons. I'm not going to go into those, we've discussed those in the past, but private investment was just not picking up, and the pandemic made it worse. So the capex strategy was, okay, let's get investment in. But that brings us to the third question, which is capex or public investment in what? Now, that's where a large chunk of the public investment is going to infrastructure. Of course, it's going to other things as well, atomic energy, railways, this, that, and defense, other things as well. But a lot of it is going into infrastructure. What infrastructure does is 2-3 things. First, it, if you make it more efficient to travel, for goods to travel, for people to travel, for logistics, costs come down. So it's good for manufacturing. It improves productivity in the economy. Infrastructure also means construction. And if you think of doing that now, then, if the government can actually now build what it wants to or has promised to in the budget, then that actually gets translated into jobs. Construction activity, which we are, whether it is rural roads, whether it is national highways, or the ropeways that are being built, or even Indira Awas Yojana, because that's housing. So a lot of money has been given for that. Now, given that construction was a sector that saw a lot of job losses, because the pandemic really did hurt construction, it hurt migrant workers.
Yes.
Okay? Now, if you are you could have thought, okay, we can just give them Manrega jobs and they'll stay in the village and keep, going for some low paid Manrega jobs. Alternatively, we pull them back into the labor market by getting construction activity up. Pulling people back into the labor market also increases their chances of continuing to find jobs. Many years ago, when Manrega had just started, I had visited some villages in Rajasthan, and people, they had job cards, but they did not want to just stay in the village and, just do Manrega jobs. Low skilled, doesn't put them in contact with the labor market, where this was in Rajsamand, and there was a social audit going on. So people actually wanted skilled jobs. They wanted to do their stone laying. They were mistris. They wanted to get back into that construction labor market. So my sense of what this, is just my reading of what is the attempt here, is that this was one sector which got really hit. Get job creation through that sector, because it's also a sector which at the same time has, very high productivity linkages, very high crowding in. It's a sector which will crowd in private investment. It'll bring both demand and improve supply. Now, that's my reading of what this budget seems to be doing.
Before I go to my next point about Manrega, I just want to, point out to our viewers, in the last episode, budget episode, some people have pointed out, and I have to apologize for an error I made. The New Deal in the US was not in the 1950s or 60s. It was actually in the 1930s, as many of our viewers have pointed out in the comment section. I stand corrected. Thank you.
YP, since we are doing corrections, so I don't know all the cryptocurrencies. And basically, there were some comments which were correcting me, and I'm sure they're right because all our young viewers actually know much more about cryptocurrencies and buy
Absolutely.
them. I was only making a broader point that
Mhm.
even that taxing of cryptocurrencies, it's not actually legalizing them, but it's kind of in that direction. But
Absolutely.
for
Look,
all the details, over to the viewers. They know
they know
cryptocurrencies better
more.
than I do.
They know more. Like
They
Saurav
know
Mukherjee told us, that guy walking down outside my house knows more about crypto than me.
more.
Okay, we will go to the sections you have talked about, roads and highways and affordable housing as the three areas where actually a lot of construction can take place. I will, try to, counter that point, because a lot of people have also said the anchor does not question the expert. The anchor only agrees with the expert on everything. So I will try to disagree with you here once. There is a lot of talk about why are we not creating more Manrega jobs? Why is the government actually cutting down allocation to Manrega jobs? Why are urban and Manrega jobs not being created? Because the crisis is now. Construction will take years to happen and jobs to be created. What will people do until then?
So Manrega budget, the budgetary proposal is 25% lower than last year's. And that last year was actually a pandemic year. And so it was a year when much fewer people were vaccinated, and when we expected the economy not to do well, and it was reaching out to those who had lost jobs. Now, think about this year, okay? If the government is right in its assumption that economic activity will not get affected, and people will get jobs, then you have the present level of expenditure. But remember that Manrega is actually demand based,
Mhm.
and so you can increase it. So if households go up and ask for jobs, there's always, of course, some friction where it takes time for the government to increase budgetary allocation to Manrega. But the beauty of Manrega is that it is a demand based program.
Mhm.
So in the depth, or in the trough down of a business cycle,
Mhm.
if more people demand jobs, then expenditure will go up. Or if in the wake of a pandemic, more people demand jobs, then expenditure on Manrega will go up. So,
Mhm.
of course, what the government has to do is to remain flexible, that it has to watch. And I think now there are these live portals where you get daily reporting of how many jobs are demanded and given out under Manrega. Of course, they should be made more efficient, and the government should remain very alert and very flexible and increase the budgetary allocation on Manrega if so required. I
Mhm.
think the hope here is that because we are better prepared, because this time we've got, many of us have got 2 or 3 vaccines, or 2 vaccines plus COVID. So
Mhm.
that's kind of 3 vaccines. Or anyway, we have, in one way or the other, we have more immunity than we had last year.
Mhm.
If that assumption is true, then this may be good enough. And if we are unfortunate and we get hit by another wave of COVID, which is more disastrous than what we have seen, then unfortunately that assumption will have to change.
Let us not hope there is another way. Last point before we take questions from our viewers. There is also the role state governments have to play, because the center has given them an incentive of 1 lakh crore interest-free loans to implement Gati Shakti rural roads construction. So that is another option that has
Yes.
been made available.
Yeah, so this 50-year interest-free loan which states can take is, another way of saying that we'll support infrastructure building activity if you wish to do it. And I think again the focus is on jobs. And YP, if I may just repeat a bit of what I was saying, it's not
Mhm.
surprising that 2 years before the elections, the general elections, there is a focus on jobs. We've had huge job losses.
Yeah.
This budget, of course, could not, it'll start getting implemented anyway in April. So it could anyway not have catered to the next elections, as some people might have thought. But, the government has to respond to the job situation. It has to respond to what's hurting people now. And yes, there is loss of income. Yes, you can do just below poverty line through Manrega. But what about those who are just above the poverty line? Even they've had huge job losses. So what seems to me, the strategy is that they'll try to now get a lot of the implementation done. Try not to lag behind on the execution of these construction activities. Because if they lag behind and it takes years, as you said, then really they don't, then they'll fail. So my sense is that it might happen towards, projects take time to take off. So it may not happen like tomorrow, but the idea would be, or at least the intent would be, to get those, up and running highways at high speed, just go ahead and doing a lot of those projects in this financial year, so that in this year and maybe, towards the end of this year and next year, people get jobs back.
Yeah. We'll take questions, Ela. We have about 10 minutes at the most to take questions. There are quite a few of them. Anurag Pandey, I don't know if it's a jobs related, construction related question without any tax benefit for middle. This is not a construction related question, so we will pass that one. Sorry, Anurag, we are focusing only on the construction aspect of the economy and the budget. Shashwat Tripathi is a new member. Hi, Ilaji. Chinese economic growth after 2008 by debt-fueled construction spree has been one of the reasons for the recent list of defaults in Chinese real estate and construction industry. Are we taking the wrong page out of the Chinese growth playbook?
I think the Chinese went overboard on borrowing and building in empty cities, and where there was nobody there in their planning. And I think that the fundamental difference between a market economy like ours, where things are demand driven, and a Chinese economy where some people find it very impressive that they have all these almost lots of new buildings, cities, roads, big bridges, big everything, where there was no demand. I mean, so it's a completely opposite model. We come at growth from two completely different ends. And I don't think that we are kind of going down that path. I hope we are not. And I hope we will not be trying that anytime in the future. I don't think the Chinese model works for us. So in this case, of course, we don't want to do that debt fuel. Of course, some government borrowing, I mean, we're talking of 6.8 is this year, it'll be 6.4 next year. I mean, it's not the kind, and households are not taking on debt. So companies are not taking on so much debt. In fact, we've seen a lot of deleveraging this year. So I hope we are not going down that path at all.
And it is a good cautionary tale for us, because we just saw late last year, what happened with the Evergrande group, the real estate group in China, which has been hit by a crisis of borrowing too much to build, and now there is no demand. Minhaj Ahmed Ansari, who's a member for the last 6 months. Hello, Minhaj. Happy to have you with us. Reforms are required for workmen welfare and benefits. Why not implement reforms and increase spending at the same time altogether? Otherwise, bringing people out of poverty may not be possible in the long term.
Yeah, so I think there is an attempt to do that through changes in labor codes. The 4 labor codes have been brought in now. The states are adopting the model labor codes. So there is this area of what the states now need to do on that. And there are attempts to bring informal workers onto the eShram portal so that they are registered, so that you can reach out to them. I see it as attempts to do both at the same time. But given how much of the informal sector has been hit, I think this is not a this is a very challenging task.
Mhm. Last question, Ela, from Rohan Mahadevan, who's a member for 2 months. Hello, Rohan. He's asking a larger question about unemployment and jobs. What is your view on the opinion that a huge reason for job losses and the obsession with government jobs in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar is because of the kind of degrees most students in these states have? 70, he has a number, I don't know where that number is from. 70.4% of graduates in Bihar have only humanities degrees, it seems.
So he's basically saying that there is a mismatch of skills.
Skills.
There's a mismatch of skills. Yes, so that is indeed true that there is a huge mismatch of skills in the country, and very often I've read a lot of Manish Sabarwal,
Mhm.
who was heading team leads and
Yeah,
was
yeah.
talking about how when people who are graduates, so called, I mean,
Mhm.
if they've studied anything or even past school, come to him, they cannot be absorbed in industries which have high demand for young people, like the hospitality industry, because of just sheer lack of personal hygiene,
Mhm.
speaking, language speaking, communication, and so on. So, I mean, that is absolutely true that this is a huge challenge for India, that there is a mismatch between what our education system is producing and what are the needs of industry.
Mhm.
And that mismatch needs to be mm, um, covered.
That mismatch needs to be covered, and hopefully, the focus on the construction and capex will bring back jobs sooner than later. We'll have to wrap this episode of Elanomics here. Thank you so much for watching. This is the third episode of Elanomics we did this week. We had one on Monday, Tuesday, and Friday, so it's a hat trick episode in that sense. Thanks for staying with us and watching. We will be back next Friday with the usual episode.